One.
All right, well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a great webinar on tap, as always, between Jeff and Helen, and it's going to be a great time. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you missed any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either Jeff or Helen, please don't wait, don't hesitate. Just use that question and answer tab right there on your interface and submit your questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's presentation. We also have a very interactive chat feature that I can see is already being utilized, which is awesome. But at any time during the webinar, if you've got something you want to say to our speakers or to us, please go ahead and chat us up and we'll chat you back. We also have 2 polling questions during the course of today's webinar, so please be on the lookout for those. And then finally, at the end of today's webinar, we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Get Unstuck, Break DevOps Barriers with Value Stream Management. Our speakers today are Jeffrey Keyes, who is the VP of Product over at Plateau, and Helen Beal, who is the Chief Ambassador at the DevOps Institute. Jeff, Helen, as always, a pleasure to see you again. Thanks for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having us. I'm really excited about today's topic because, well, as we've learned from the most recent State of DevOps report, most people are kind of stuck and trying to get there. Before you get going, though, do take a moment, head over to the chat. There's a question there for everyone, just so you can connect in. This is meant and intended to be an interactive session. It's not often you get to, in essence, ask the experts, but today we are privileged to have Helen with us and to walk us through a few things. So in talking about today's discussion, we're going to go through a flow of basic causes of the plateau that most people hit with DevOps, and then looking at VSM then as the next generation, and then kind of listening to what some of the analysts and the industry experts are telling us, and then implementing some real world practices to move forward. So with that, Helen, let's talk about why we are here. There's what is a DevOps plateau?
It's everyone's getting stuck a bit, aren't they? There's this stagnation. So we're really looking at those big blue bars in the middle of this chart from the State of DevOps Report 2021, which came out, a month or so ago. So how long is it now? 2009 to now, so about 12 years into the DevOps movement. Mm-hmm. And I think we really hoped that more people would be in the high performing area, but we're really not seeing that at the moment. So the question then, I think, becomes, well, why are people getting stuck? And actually, Patrick Dubois, I'm going to quote him in a second, but I'll just explain who he is first. So Patrick Dubois is, it's all his fault that we even have DevOps, actually. So there's a long and involved story about Patrick and Andrew Schaefer trying to meet at a conference and not. And then, cut a long story short, what happened is that Patrick started an event called DevOps Days in Ghent and used the hashtag at DevOps Days. And that's where the whole movement sprang from, was that Twitter hashtag that he coined. He's quoted in this report, and I'm going to say some of what he said before that definition that he's finally come up with. He said that despite all their DevOps talk and funded initiatives, these companies have failed to address or understand the cultural, organizational, process changes required to adopt a new way of working with technology. They may have invested in automation. 67% of mid-evolution respondents say their team has automated most repetitive tasks, but as an organization, they haven't addressed the organizational silos and misaligned incentives around deploying software to production that gave rise to the DevOps movement, as evidenced by the fact that majority, 58%, report multiple handoffs between teams that are required for the deployment of products and services.
Yep. That's the real world of where we sit today and the majority of software development.
So for value stream management people, this is very interesting, because what Patrick's pointing at is the core problem with people stagnating and getting stuck with DevOps is they're not thinking like value streams. They've still got all these handoffs. They've still haven't optimized flow. And that very succinct quote that he's put there, it's quite funny, because DevOps and all the progenitors of DevOps resisted really trying to define it, and it caused problems in the market because people would didn't really know what it was, and lots of people thought it was different things, and some people put it very firmly in an automation bucket and tried to keep it there and trap it in its little box. But finally, after all this time, Patrick says he has come up with a definition, and this is it. DevOps is whatever you do to bridge friction created by silos. All the rest is engineering. I think it's very, very focused, and absolutely what we're trying to do with value stream management as well.
That's exactly right, because a lot of people have gone a lot of distance with CI and with release automation, deployment automation, but it's still not really getting to the heart of what's going on. So when we look at, let's go back then and start to look at some of the causes of getting people to stall out. Why are they not getting rid of these handoffs? What is causing some of these issues that they're having?
Right at the center, the big blue circle, is the wrong organizational culture. So what we're saying there is that people are still trying to be hierarchical. They're still trying to do command and control. They're still trying to create silos because people like silos, because that gives them power. There was an amazing LinkedIn post actually I read yesterday from Nicholas Chalin, who is Chief Software Officer CSO at the US Department of Defense, and has just resigned. And he explained in this post his reasons for his resignation. And one of the points that he made was that the leadership just weren't really truly bought into the changes they were trying to make. They weren't willing to distribute that authority out to the teams, to make the teams more autonomous, to allow the teams to own the end-to-end process. So this all harks back to Werner Vogels at AWS, who said, you build it, you run it. I prefer we build it, we own it, because that shows more accountability. And also it is more than just about building, running it. It is about connecting, as you often talk about, connecting planning to delivery and connecting feedback to planning as well. So it's an entire cycle. So, and there's other things about culture that are wrong as well. People still aren't treating failures as learning opportunities, and the result of the investments that they've made. They're still scared of failure and fearful of failure, and they're not trying to build failure in early and fail smart and fail often and fail early. And they're not creating psychological safety, which is Google's Project Aristotle noted is the #1 factor in high-performing teams, is where people feel that they have the safety to work together. So there's all of these organizational aspects that are the very core of this problem.
Wow. And how are these organizational aspects impacting this plateau? How are you seeing this sort of play out?
So the problem really is these silos. So when we have silos, work goes from silo to silo to silo to silo. So you look at a whole value stream, it's got steps in it, it's got activities in it, it's got processes in it, whatever you want to call them. There's multiple things that happen. And if every time we complete a step or an activity or a process, we then have to wait, hand off to someone else, then they do the work, then they have to hand off to someone else, and they're not really ready. So there's a delay there as well. We get this lack of control, this lack of autonomy. And we have this problem around the misaligned incentives as well. So this was very, very stark in the early days of DevOps. So for example, IT ops were often incented to keep systems up as much as possible. Of course they were, but this meant that they were quite resistant to the change. And then on the other side, we had developers that were incented to push change through. So we had this big kind of knocking of heads together, where some people wanted change and some people wanted stability, and they couldn't really combine the two. And in DevOps, we've really learned how to combine throughput with stability, but we're still not completely there. And then the other part is this, I kind of inferred this earlier, that some people do like to define DevOps as automation and forget about the culture, the lean, the measurement, the sharing aspects of it, and they put tech first. And it really has always been true in our industry that it's people, process, tools. So we do the tech last. Once we've got the culture ready and the humans ready and we've got the processes right, then we apply the technology.
Why do you, Tell me some factors. So what are some of the symptoms of people doing tech first? What do you see happening?
So a classic one is around release management. And this is a classic example of where you really shouldn't implement release management before you fully understand your process, because what happens is people end up automating really bad, clunky processes, and they end up in a place where they then can't improve them. So there are other tools. The example I always give is something like APM or AI Ops is probably a tool actually that you can apply without having to do a huge amount of process work, because it's essentially gathering data and giving you insights, and there's no kind of like steps or workflow, or very little workflow involved with it, so you can kind of get away with it. But something like release management, you are at risk of taking those 180 step run books of release and deploy, or release, deploy, release, whatever terminology you're using, and just making it worse.
It's just like I remember one of the early customers that I had met with, early prospects actually, and he had talked about how they were implementing DevOps, and I said, "What does that mean?" Well, we've got a CI tool, great. And then he commented how they have a whole DevOps team that's been automating deployments and all sorts of stuff, but it's been 18 months and they've yet to deliver anything. And my mind just blown again, because he was discussing the tax that follows with every release, the governance, the ability to accommodate what was there. And so there was end up being two choices: either they're going to try to automate all that, or just disregard it all and move forward. You're absolutely right. The tech first doesn't really get to the core of the problems. Well, kind of moving this forward, what is the relationship then between DevOps and VSM?
Yeah, we kind of go in cycles, don't we? And we stand on the shoulders of giants and things like that. But if we look at the evolution of DevOps, I guess, like, we used to do waterfall. We used to do very, very large batch projects. So we'd have huge amounts of requirements, do huge amounts of planning, put, a load of money, huge amounts of money aside, lots of time, and then have a horrible experience, as we discovered as we went through, that we didn't do everything, took longer than we thought it would. Testing got really squished. The business wouldn't let us move the release date, so we all ended up working 24 hours a day towards the end of the project. Then we delivered it. We probably were, even with the resistance of the business, over time, probably over budget, probably delivered something that wasn't what people wanted. It either wasn't quite what they'd asked for in the first place, or the market had moved and the requirements had changed because so much time had gone by. So all of those problems meant that we wanted a better way of working. So we looked at more iterative and incremental ways of working. So doing things in much smaller batches. And that's really these were heralded by things like extreme programming and Scrum, and we rolled them all up under the banner of Agile. And then we realized that Agile needed to scale. So large enterprises had multiple teams. So we needed to figure out how to do Agile across thousands of people. So safe and less and disciplined Agile came along. And DevOps kind of came along as well as building on Agile. So you can see the link there. So there was a problem with Agile in that fundamentally it's a software development methodology. So we had our development team. So broadly speaking, most technology teams split into two pieces. They split into development and IT operations. So we then ended up in a situation where our developers were happily practicing Agile and our IT operations people were practicing ITSM. And there wasn't a connection between the two. And this is also more of what was causing the problems. That's our two first major big silos, Dev and Ops. And that's where DevOps came from, trying to resolve the conflict that we were seeing between those requirements for throughput, those requirements for stability, that conflict that it became apparent when things happened, like we always talk about throwing a release over the wall of confusion. So developers would chuck their code, IT operations to release it. IT operations wouldn't really know what it was. They'd try and deploy it. It would all go horrible. Everyone's hair would be on fire. There'd be a blame game. There'd be finger pointing. It'd all be very unpleasant. Then we'd have things like developers asking for admin access to production machines. Obviously, something that's massively out of most governance requirements most organizations have. We'd have developers complaining that it takes IT operations far too long to provide them with environments. So it was a pretty horrible place. So that's your DevOps stuff. Then we've got what happened initially in Venice with their arsenal when people started to think about flow. And then we had Ford doing some stuff with manufacturing. And then the big one was Toyota back in the 1950s. And this is where lean really came out. So lean started to appear, and alongside that started the information and materials flow, as Toyota called it, which then evolved into what we know as value stream mapping these days. And then in the 1990s, some people practicing value stream mapping recognizes some of the challenges that we recognize around mapping as well. So things like it's quite hard to execute because it's quite human intensive. And it's limited in terms of kind of the way that it uses metrics. And there's all these challenges around mapping. So Peter Hines and a group of people, Don Tapping, a whole group of people started talking about value stream management as a wider method that's kind of, it has mapping as a central part of it. So back then we were seeing value stream management, but we have a whole new kind of phase or new emergence of value stream management right now, because DevOps has not hit the buffers, but as we've established, it's kind of got stuck. People are finding it hard to really make it happen. And part of the reason for that is metrics. It's to do with the silos and the culture that we've talked about. And there's also obviously a very interesting development in technology, and it's always such an exciting field to work in because new things always happen. You kind of sometimes think, well, surely we've invented everything. It's like we've done all these things. It's like, you know, how much more can we do to our smart devices? And then something else happens. And what's happened now is that we've all learned how to build DevOps tool chains, and now we have value stream management platforms that can access the data in those tool chains and automate things like the value stream map. So we have this resurgence of value stream management that you and I often refer to as next generation DevOps, for example.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, there's a comment from Brian that I think is super relevant. He says, in the DoD space, the reality is we have to align the agile and DevOps processes with the CDRLs. I'm assuming that's part of the release processes and the governance and so forth that are there, which are all waterfall based. Lots of work there to find ways to align modern development to ancient contract requirements. Until CDRLs are made more flexible to support Agile and DevOps, we'll have problems in the DoD. I couldn't agree more. I mean, it doesn't have to be DoD. Could be financial tech, healthcare.
I was on a workshop yesterday with a pharmaceutical company, and one of the post-it notes that somebody put on the mural board said, "We're yet to master combining project management with agile delivery." And I spoke to my fellow consultant afterwards, and we just went, well, you're never going to master it. They're fundamentally different. You can't, it's one or the other. If you try and do, you know, water, scrum, fall, or Wagile, or whatever you want to call it, you're setting yourselves up for failure. So you have to commit to the path.
Absolutely. And, you know, this is where value stream management can come in to help to basically look to adopt some of the practices that are there to help achieve the initial goals, maybe in a different way. And that's the point. And then that gives you the ability to kind of expand. What's different about VSM now?
It's because of digital disruption. So we are in a place where the digital value stream is the lead. So we are all technology companies. If we want to survive in the digital age, we have to become technology companies, which elevates the importance of a digital value stream. And even things that may not look like digital value streams are becoming them. So in the Value Stream Management Foundation course, which is upcoming from the consortium, we've got a number of case studies. And I think it's the Nike one. I'd have to double check. But one of them refers to the annual reports, and in their actual annual reports, which are available publicly on the internet, it talks about how they're taking all of the value stream and value chain learning from digital and applying it to all of their value streams. But they also note that actually all of their value streams, so things like supply, for example, all have very important digital elements that they want to increase as well. So part of it is the fact that digital is basically king now and leading everything that we do in the digital world. And part of it is the maturity of DevOps. So DevOps taught us to really leverage the number one item in the Agile Manifesto, which is all about the continuous delivery of value to customers. And it taught us to automate it. So we learned how to build continuous integration. We learned how to do trunk-based development and commit code at each stage to trunk and run automated tests around unit testing and integration testing and user acceptance testing. And we learned how to have our software always in a releasable state so that we could release when we wanted to. And that helped us build this tool chain. And those with the most sophisticated tool chain will also connect a lot of their planning and portfolio management, product backlogs to their tool chain. They'll also connect their service desk and then their non-functional testing, so their security and performance testing, for example, to the tool chain. And they'll also connect a good deal of observability and AI ops into the back end and feed that back into the backlog. So we've got these incredible tool chains, and what I've just described there is pretty much a value stream from idea to realization. So we now have at our fingertips, were we only able to find a tool that could help us do it.
If only.
If only we could get that data out of that tooling and learn about the flow of our products and value streams.
And that's really why we're having this webinar, is to help move forward wherever you are in your DevOps capability to improve it. Speaking of which, I think we're ready for a poll, and maybe Charlene, you can help us out with that.
I think I've just started it, actually.
Oh, perfect.
Pop up. It should be there.
You should see a poll now.
Yeah, they are voting.
It's there. Yep.
Yeah. We have one response so far, which is we are stuck. So that's where we thought people were. We've got a few more responses. Got to continue to evolve. I wanted just to refer to something you said a little while back as well, though. You mentioned a sort of case story you've been working with in a chat that talks about the DevOps team, and I wanted to really highlight that as what we consider often to be an anti-pattern in DevOps, because what they've just done is create another silo. It's another team. It's another place that we're having to hand off from. So there are different ways of looking at that. If we looked at things like team topologies, for example, we might want to consider that a platform or an enabling team. For instance, if they were building a framework of a DevOps toolchain as a service, where they would be providing that as a self-service capability to all the other teams, that would be more acceptable. But we do see a lot of people creating that DevOps team and it becoming another silo. Do you want to close the poll, or do you want to give them a bit longer?
We can let them respond a little bit longer as we get just a bit more. We'll close in just a minute, but we can move on from a slide perspective and kind of continue the conversation. So, Helen, this is like a hot topic. I mean, you're sort of part analyst as well. That was how we originally met. What do you hear basically the industry analysts saying about value stream management?
70% of organizations will use value stream management by 2023. That's a headline. It's not on that slide, but it's from Gartner. Evelyn, Research in Action, it's a must do, not a nice to do. Forrester, who arguably Chris Condon and the team started this whole thing off by coining a definition, which is not there, but basically talks about how we map, govern, optimize using these processes, but also these tools. And they recognize that there is a whole tools category out there as well. Back in 2017, 2018, I think they actually published their first wave. And they were a bit of a lone voice, weren't they, in the analyst community up until last year. And then in 2020, the analyst community kind of exploded in terms of the amount of value stream management market research we were seeing coming out. But I think all the analysts are on the same page, is that it is a thing. It's a really important thing, and it is potentially the thing that's really going to help us into the next stage of evolution as DevOps perhaps causes us some problems right now.
What, you mentioned some industry kinds of stuff around value stream management. If only there was some kind of non-profit foundation. What can you tell us about that?
If only there was a vendor neutral community that people could join to learn more about value stream management. Wouldn't that be amazing? So,
wouldn't that be amazing?
We had this conversation, Jeff and I, 18 months ago, and in March this year, on March the 3rd, we were finally able to launch the Value Stream Management Consortium with Plateau, obviously, as a founder member with some of the other vendors in the space. And we did our State of Value Stream Management Report, which we released mid-July, looking into various aspects and discovering some fairly significant things like correlations between higher performing organizations and the use of value stream management principles and practices like mapping and measuring flow and things like that. So yes, we have some independent people working here as well.
Absolutely. So on the analyst side, I went ahead and closed the poll, by the way, and we can talk about the results. But on the analyst side, what are you hearing change over the last couple of years from the analysts themselves on value stream management?
So one of the most recent things is Gartner in particular kind of identified that there's two sorts of player in this market. There's the value stream management delivery platform, and then the value stream delivery platform and the value stream management platform. Clarified, two types. Delivery management, based in delivery, they consider to be the execution plane, and the management is the control plane. And the delivery ones really are the vendors that have multiple components in the DevOps tool chain. So they might be, if you took Atlassian as an example, they've kind of got Jira and Bitbucket and Bamboo, for example. So they've got various different pieces. And then there's the management platforms, which don't necessarily have component parts of the tool chain, but what they've got is the ability to do things like have a common data model where they can ingest and normalize the data that are coming from the tools in the DevOps tool chain, and then use automation to gain insights, maybe use AI to build on those insights, and then control workflows and create visibility into the value streams using their platform. So I think the main thing that the analysts are seeing is a rapid advance in these sort of technologies and the understanding of them in the market. I think Gartner may possibly do away with some of that differentiation moving forward. We might see changes there. I think we are seeing more people understand that they don't need to do all the tools integration themselves. More people understanding that just having a dashboard is actually not very helpful. Just having a skin giving you metrics from multiple tools is not anywhere near as helpful as being able to track the work as it moves through the different tools. I think that traceability is becoming all important as well.
Isn't that the truth? Which really brings us to maybe a change of way of thinking of VSM. Really, what is VSM about? Well, let me ask it a different way. Why do we need value stream management?
Because we want to become highly performing organizations, because we're in a digitally disrupted world. So what we need to do in order to become more highly performing is consider how we deliver our work. So there is this duality that you can see here. We've got flow and realization. So this is about time to not market, because we can do things very fast but deliver stuff that isn't useful. So it's more about time to value, but we could also argue that it's about time to learning or time to actioned insights. But we basically need to know how fast we can deliver things to our customers, not just so that we can set expectations with stakeholders, but actually so that we know that we are healthy. These are health metrics, things like deployment frequency, things like our cycle time. These are things that tell us about our organization and our value stream health. They are ultimately outputs, but they're very important. And in this new world, our customer is key. We're no longer driven by shareholders, for example. Everything revolves around customer experience. If we get customer experience right, then it follows that our organization should be highly performant. And, obviously there's a little bit of a business angle in there. You can't just, create loads of amazing stuff and not charge the right price for it. You'll go out of business. So there is a balance, and we need to understand our P&L. But generally, if you've got happy customers, they're going to buy more and tell people how brilliant it is, and more people will buy it, and more people will buy more.
Absolutely. So let's talk more about data-driven. You mentioned that. Where does that fit in this journey?
So this is actually quite important culturally, and I didn't mention it earlier, so I'm glad you've come back to it. So fundamentally, if you're going to say what's the most important feature for a DevOps organization, or an organization wanting to practice DevOps and be highly dynamic, I think the number one feature is trust, because when we have high trust, we have low friction. So everything is faster and lower cost. But trust isn't something that humans give freely without question to each other. We have to build it with each other. And if you imagine a world without data, everything we do is opinion driven. So you might think one thing and you're a different type of person from me. So you you might vote for a different political party, and those are your beliefs, and that's fair enough, and that kind of thing. But it's very subjective and very opinion driven. So we can't move very fast, and it's hard to build trust. But if we've got data, we've got evidence, we've got empiricism around our reality, we know what our reality looks like, so we've got metrics and data that tell us that. So we can kind of stop talking about opinions and just look at the facts together and decide to get on with something together and use things like experimentation to build hypotheses and test hypotheses out that use more data. I'm actually moving a little bit beyond data-driven conversations these days into insight-driven businesses. There's been some more research coming out of Forrester that talks about this kind of next level of evolution. And actually, data's good, right? But data only becomes useful when we have had an insight, and actually only when we've actioned that insight and something has happened as a consequence of what we learned from that data. But it all starts with data.
Isn't that the truth? I hear so often, again, as a vendor, people that are like, prime for us to talk to, where you will meet with some particular team and they're struggling because they're feeling like they're doing so well in their DevOps journey and DevOps capabilities. Boy, the automation's there, they've got the tests, they've been decomposing, they're trying to get through there. But just like Brian mentioned, it's like, well, I've got all this crap stuff that's going on that's out of my control. And they're putting all these requirements. We got to throw CAB in there. We've got to get our regulatory compliance in place. There's this reporting requirements. And it's to the point of, look, that is the job of solving flow. That is the job of really improving your DevOps. And the only way you're going to get there is by providing data of how you're doing. And to prove that you've got all these, in essence, requirements solved up front or solved as part of your pipeline. And you can use the data to do that. And then if you can pre-attack that, and again, if only there was a tool out there that could help you through that process of modeling release pipelines, wow, you're all of a sudden breaking down these silos and bringing teams together with a common goal of improving flow of the entire value stream itself. It's like it's a whole mind shift. So if you find yourself frustrated with these other teams, now's the time to pull them in and say, hey, there's tools that do this. Pull us in and we can bring data together and make this happen. Well, moving on, let's talk more about getting unstuck. And maybe we can talk a bit about, there's a journey here of implementing value stream management and value stream management practices along with a tool that help us get there. So talk to us about this journey.
Yes, this is the implementation roadmap that we introduced in our State of Value Stream Management report that's coming up in the trainings. The training's kind of built around it. And actually, it quite succinctly explains, again, what's different about value stream management now with its connection to DevOps to where it's been previously. I mean, to the extent that Gary Rupp, who's one of the board advisors, who just back in August released his book, Driving DevOps with Value Stream Management, he followed the 8-step principle, which was outlined in this book. You probably can't see that very well, but and then he saw this later, and actually I think we might see another edition of his book coming out that reflects this, because he felt so strongly this is how it works. But I'll tell you another story about some feedback we had from some people in Australia on it. So first off, you start wherever you are, and then the next thing you do is identify your value streams to figure out where they are. Now, a value stream is anything that delivers a product or a service, or other people say if something's got a customer, it's a value stream as well. So you do that, and then you can organize around it. So you need to understand who the people are that are associated with that value stream from idea to realization. Then you need to do your mapping. So it's still a part of what we do in value stream management is the mapping. We need to understand what all those steps are and what the activities are and how they link together. But you can see we've kind of made it subservient to the overall process, whereas a lot of people that are new to value stream management have been familiar with mapping, and they kind of think mapping is the where we lead in and the big part of it. And it is a step, but it's not as big as a lot of people think. Then this is where we really get powered by digital, because this is where we connect. So this is where we use our value stream management platform to connect all the tools in our DevOps tool chain, and consequently we automate our value stream map. So suddenly we don't have to have 2-day workshops every time we want to review the value stream map. Suddenly We've got it in front of us, real time.
Would it be such a concept? Wouldn't it be wild if somebody said, "How long does it take us to get an idea into production?" Wouldn't crazy?
Crazy idea. And that gives us the ability to inspect and adapt at any time. So, of course, inspect and adapt, transparency, inspection, and adaptability, the three pillars of Scrum and of empiricism. So we can continue inspect and adapt. And for example, if you are practicing Scrum, you could be doing this every time you do sprint planning. You could be looking, you could have goals around your cycle time. You can do it every day in your Scrum, looking for those impediments and giving your Scrum Master data and evidence when they need to go and figure out how to remove impediments with other people. You can do it in sprint review and see how well you did against your sprint goals. You can do it in retrospective and look into the value stream for improvements to the process for the next sprint. So that's the map, and that's how it changes. Now, I mentioned the Australians. The Australians looked at this and they kind of said, well, one of the things we could do is pull the connect forward. So we could actually do that potentially, say, between organize and map. Now, I completely agree with them. There was a reason I didn't put that in this version, because we talked about people, process, tools, right? And we do fall into that trap of using tools too often, frequently. And there is actually quite a lot of benefit from doing the physical value stream mapping. If the audience wanted to check out the State of Value Stream Management Report 2021, one of the things we asked was what people find challenging about value stream mapping and what they find valuable about it. And in particular, in the what they find valuable, we learned that the human aspects of getting clarity of vision, gaining empathy and understanding around each other's roles, all of those kind of things are really powerful. So if we connect first without map, we do potentially lose all of that human value. But we do immediately automate our map. So,
hey, there you go. There you go. Well, moving on, there's a bit of there's what you see and what you can't. And then, can you talk a bit about culture impacts? How culture really impacts the tech and the organizational performance as it relates to this?
So Agile introduced us to concepts like small, multifunctional, autonomous teams. So initially we'd think about things like having a development team, and we'd have our product owner and we are Scrum Master. So we're bringing some planning closer to the developers, and then we would include more testing in our Scrum teams as well. So we've started to get multifunctional. As we've gone on with DevOps, we've got even more multifunctional. So we now often see teams that have a product owner, developers, testers, maybe even single people handling both roles, and IT operations people increasingly in that team as well, particularly sort of cloud engineers and things like that. So that's all good. So we're getting towards that value stream management approach where we are understanding and building and owning ourselves from idea to value realization. But the cultural impact of that organizational design is that we have people working very closely together. So when we look at things like purpose, we can really unite and have clarity around purpose in these smaller units. We've got better psychological safety. We've got better trust. We can work together. We can empower those teams much more effectively than we can when we've got separate silos that need to be managed because there's so many interdependencies and things like that. So the actual physical kind of organizational design impacts how culture feels and at what speed the work can go. Kind of harks back a bit to Conway's law, right? So
it absolutely does. And we've had so many cases where, often Plateau will start with a release management group or a test environment management group. And you will watch where that group starts off as this group that's not liked by the development teams. They're the masters of no. They're the ones that slow down the software delivery process. And meanwhile, of course, their mandate as a release management organization is to ensure that production is preserved at high quality. It's a valuable goal. What happens is over time, as they use data to influence the teams around them, their value goes up because they're able to point out to teams like, look, if you were to automate more, we could help this go through the process faster. You would then, in essence, get on on a fast train to production and be able to reach out and touch production as you break the dependencies and prove that you have the right level of quality implemented beforehand. And oh, by the way, here's all these compliance things that you need to build in, and all that improves software delivery and quality for everyone, and really starts to break down the flows. Talking about this, what do you suggest people do about the things that you can't see?
Make visible. Yeah, learn to see, right? Learn to see, make work visible. These are phrases that were certainly not coined by myself. Things people like Mike Rother and Dominic de Grandis have coined those ones. But yeah, we need to get inside it. So we need to find a way to observe that data. And the data's there, right? In DevOps, we have the mantra telemetry everywhere. So we know we have the data and we have observable systems. So we need to find a way to get into them. And the short answer to that is, of course, value stream management. And I think we haven't really talked about this, so I want to say it quite explicitly. I mentioned Conway's Law. Conway's Law tells us that we create systems that are very similar to our communication structure or our organizational structure, which means that if we've got lots and lots of silos and people handing stuff off to each other, we'll likely create monoliths and have lots of dependencies between parts of our system, which will slow us down. It's very slow to build, test, and deploy a very large system. It's much better to have something that's loosely coupled and smaller, microservices perhaps, where you can build, test, and deploy very small pieces of work with very little risk to the rest of the organization. So fundamental to all of this is a place where we want to end up in, where we're no longer managing dependencies, we're breaking them, and ultimately in a place where they're all broken. And actually we do have a loosely coupled architecture, and we have loosely coupled teams and a loosely coupled organization structure as well. But it's very hard to get from a place where you are tightly coupled and monolithic to that ideal place, particularly if you've got years or decades of systems that have been built. And it's hard to unpick what we've done before, and it's not like we did it all wrong. We didn't know when we were doing it that there was a better way. We've only learned that as we've come along. So it's another reason why something like a value stream management platform is really useful, because we can see those dependencies and we can manage them. So whilst we're working towards breaking them, we can see them, they become visible, so that we can do things like understand what the risk associated with a particular release, for example, might be.
Absolutely. I like the analogy too, that, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. Having visibility into how much better it is as you're breaking those dependencies is your pitch to anyone about why make the investments into automation, breaking dependencies, autonomous teams, shifting left all sorts of practices from security, automation, and so forth. But you need data to prove it, and that's the key. Speaking of that, from a capability matrix, how does this evolution happen, and how do teams know where they are?
Yes, this is our first attempt at knocking together such a thing. I think we've all agreed it's doing the job fairly well at this moment, but let me talk the listeners through how it's working. So we've got 5 dimensions down the side, and then we've got our 3 levels of capabilities. So starting with emerging, then moving towards learning, and then practicing, and then evolving. So if you pick a line like DevOps toolchain, for example, when we're just emerging in terms of capabilities there, we're building our CI, our continuous integration. So we're learning trunk-based development and learning to automate the build and automate the tests around unit testing and integration testing and user acceptance. At the learning level, we're using continuous delivery. So we have got our software always in a releasable state, and we're probably releasing at least once a sprint, at the end of the sprint, or hopefully as and when the code is ready and the customer desires it. At practicing, we have got an extensive tool chain. So we have connected planning and things like the service desk and the observability element. So we understand that there is this concept of an idea starting and then value being realized. But in evolving, we actually can trace that work. So we can see something when it pops up in an idea in an epic in our portfolio management, and when it turns into a work item in our product backlog, and when it starts to be developed in our IDE and we're using artifact repositories, and when we're using our CI servers, we can see all of that the whole way around, to the point that it might result in an actioned insight that becomes something that new that goes into the product backlog, and we go round the cycle again.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Very good. And how are folks, how do they measure their progress on this journey?
So they can simply look at this matrix, is one way to do it. Look at the matrix and figure out where they are at the moment, and then come back to decide some things that they're going to do, some interventions, some things that they could change, write those experiments, deliver and execute them as experiments, and review the results, and then come back and look at this a bit later. So it's like any kind of assessment tool. This is effectively a self-assessment form, but what would really help them is actually having metrics around this as well that would prove things. So there is a metrics line here too. So at emerging, you can see that when people are just emerging, they'll be looking at things like incident rate and the change fail rate. And as they're starting to learn more, they'll be considering things like deployment frequency. It's a metric I often pick on because it's one that really helps us show that metrics evolve too, and metrics need to change. And this is about continuous improvement, because deployment frequency is interesting if you're only deploying every 3 or 6 months, and it becomes more interesting as you watch that change. So you're deploying once a month, once a sprint, once a week, once a day. Once you're deploying on demand, though, that metric is no longer interesting. And this is where different ones become more interesting, like things like how long is it taking us to do the work? So how long from code commit, how long from an idea? And then when we're really evolving, we're really leveraging these flow metrics. So it becomes much more than cycle time. We want to understand things about like flow distribution, which is one of my favorite ones, which is, which types of work are we doing during a different part of a different cycle or a different work increment. So, how many work items are related to technical debt, how many are related to quality, tells us a lot about the health of our value stream. And then the ultimate one, which I think the industry is yet really to get to, is that other part of the duality of value stream management, which is the value realization element. So this is really getting data out of our systems that tells us what the actual customer experience is like. And, we have things like RUM and AI Ops and things like that can tell us a bit about customer journey time and a bit about usage of applications and features and things like that. But we really need to bring this all together so that we can really understand that change that we made. What did the customer experience? Did they like it? And then also, this is the ultimate goal, what did they like about it? So that one's going to be quite tricky, I think, because it probably require quite a lot of sort of sentiment data, probably quite unstructured data.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of which, why don't we ask folks, where do you see yourself on this journey? So I think we've got a poll, and I'll go back to the prior slide if we can put that poll live.
It's live.
But see where you think you are on your journey yourself. Are you just emerging on your value stream journey? Are you learning, practicing? You got it all nailed and you're just, refining the dots? Take a second and put some responses in there.
There's some comments that we might want to have a chat about as well from Omar. Speaking of the culture iceberg, I'll reveal my vote. We're stuck because we have silos. The people mindset's hard to break. In his opinion, it's better to force policies from upper architecture manager. Sometimes people just refuse to be agile open. Developers, for example, working in a new main component locally in their laptops and surprising you with it a few days before delivery. Enforcing VSM as policies employees must follow may not be nice, but it should be done, I think. So our old carrot and stick argument, it is very, very hard to change culture and behaviours. But I agree, value co-creation, exactly that. You need to get these people on the same team and understand that they're on the same team. So probably breaking the organisational structure down a little bit there. And empowering them.
Absolutely. And this is where if you, we'll talk about that in a second. So on the poll, sounds like most folks are just getting started. And frankly, in the very first survey that we ever did on value stream management that Plateau sponsored, I remember it was of 19 DevOps categories, it was the fastest growing one. But when we asked people where they were, this is goodness, 2 years ago, 2+, everybody said they're just starting. So it just seemed like that's where it was going. So All right, here we go. This is there's a lot to take in here. Hey, Helen, how do we connect value stream management and DevOps? let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I think there's two answers in my head, really. One is this concept I have of value stream management being that next generation of DevOps. And we talked about that earlier, how value stream management is helping us unstick some of the problems that we've had with DevOps, and how it's extending what we've done with mapping, and it's really helping us with metrics. There's another angle on this that I feel like DevOps is the toolkit for value stream management. So if we layer the two together, and we haven't got this slide today, but you can actually layer a DevOps toolchain over this value cycle as well. So you can imagine having things like Jira Align for portfolio management over ideas, and Jira as a product backlog, for example. Around CI, you could have things like an artifact repository like JFrog's Artifactory, and you could have a CI tool. Like GitLab, you could have some unit tests from NUnit for .NET. So you could see how the different tools could layer around it. But what you can also do is use DevOps and everything we've learned about DevOps practices and apply them as a toolkit to unsticking your value stream. So when you are getting your value stream maps, and whether you're doing them physically or whether you've managed to get a platform to automate them for you, you'll be seeing where there's delays. So there's suggested interventions here for where you're seeing delays in particular parts of the value stream. So, for example, if you're seeing delays at the back end of ideas, you might want to consider your change process. You mentioned cabs earlier on. Cabs are absolutely classic in my value stream mapping experience of causing very unnecessary delays, very much not a value adding activity. And I think it was the Accelerated State of DevOps Report 2019 that showed that there was a negative correlation between the use of cabs and organization performance. So the recommendation is to go much lighter weight and really push that autonomy into the teams, empower the teams to be much more able to make decisions around that sort of thing themselves and become peer-based. Is one example of intervention. Let me know if you want to go through some more.
Oh, all good. Actually, I do see we're kind of running out of time. Related to that, I mean, that's the point of implementing value stream management, is to help bring this together so that you can have the influence to get rid of things like cab. That's the point. And there's only one way to do it, is you're going to have to incorporate data, show that the data is helping, show that the concerns that cab, that the advisory board is interested in, are being addressed so that it's unnecessary. Because it's not that it was, anyways, that's kind of where that goes. So well, lots to talk about. From a value stream management point of view, really these boil down into a core set of ideas of challenges that every software factory faces. And the fundamental idea is it's about visibility, and without visibility, you can't achieve the efficiency or the collaboration that you need to. You're in the land of the blind without doing that. And you can't see what's happening on individual pipelines. You can't see what's happening in the portfolio. You can't have a good way of managing across disparate methodologies. And therefore, those are all done manually without having some kind of automated data collection and aggregation. The effort's just too great. So you're really limited on your opportunities to manage continuous improvement. The idea of even going the next step of experimentation, well, that's a bridge too far. But yet that's truly where we need to go. From a value stream management platform point of view, hey, there's tools out there that will help you in this journey. In fact, are pivotal. Plateau is a cloud-based platform as a value stream management platform, and that integrates to the existing tools that you've got now. Just connect it up to the tool chain, let it ingest. We've got a common data model, which will normalize all the data that comes in, correlate it together, and in essence, unify the tool chains together so that you can have data from one flowing to another. That gives you the ability to do some cool stuff, starting first and foremost at the analytics at the top of this view, so you can see what's happening. Now, while that's cool, and you can get things like flow metrics, you can get things like KPIs for release, quality data, risk data, insights into where and what aspects you need, how do you delivery timeframes, environment utilization, environment drift, deployment times, all this cool data. Well, that's nifty. That's not really solving problems for you. It's going to point you in a direction, and now you need to sort of take the next step. That's where the magic of that middle layer, the management orchestration layer, comes in, to where you can go to your release team or your environments team, or again, back to the operations side, where these silos are being addressed and people are digging their heels in, and hand them tools so that they can orchestrate, combine together the manual and automated activities, and lay out the process that are happening for each of these phases. So through the release process of scoping and defining releases and delivering them all through the and managing them through the entire life cycle, or the environments themselves of provisioning and getting them on a journey of infrastructure as code. How do you help that happen? Well, you give them data and you give them tools so they can actually see what's going on, and then use the process as you help automate and improve your DevOps capabilities down that path and journey. This is what we do. We're a platform that helps you through all this. So if you find yourself stuck, we can help you get unstuck by following this formula that Helen has laid out. Take a look at the e-guide that we put in the handouts. It's just a high-level form of it, of this discussion, starting with a value stream map, and then how to implement, and so forth. There's just a lot to this. So key takeaways, Helen, and then we better turn it back over to Charlene. What are the key takeaways here that we've got to remember?
You want to optimize flow. That's the core of all of this. You want to get things to your customer that are going to delight them as fast as you can. So let's do that. It's hard to do DevOps. It's hard because of silos. It's hard because of culture and organizational design. But what we have to do is focus on breaking all of those dependencies. But while you're doing that, you need something to help you manage it and help you have the data to know where to put your effort to break those dependencies. And that the answer to that is value stream management as well. So think of DevOps as your toolkit. Once you've learned to operate as a value stream management or a value stream led organization, then DevOps is going to give you the tools to unlock those places where you are still stuck.
Love it. Love it. Love it. If you are feeling stuck and you're not sure how to proceed, by all means, reach out to us, LinkedIn, or just reach out, and we can help you on this journey. Charlene, I think we'll hand back to you on any of that kind of stuff to finish this up.
All right, great. So you guys were really great about addressing chats and questions and stuff throughout the webinar. So we only have 3 minutes left. So unfortunately, we don't really have any more time for that stuff. But I do want to thank everybody who did submit a chat and a question during today's webinar. There were some really great comments that came through. I was really riveted by what folks had to say about it. So thank you to everybody who did. Excuse me. Just a quick reminder that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website. So you can always go look for it there. Just go to DevOps.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. Okay, before we close things out, let's go ahead and do that drawing for the $425 Amazon gift cards. Excuse me. Sorry, I'm dying over here. Allergies. Our first winner today is Sarah F. Congratulations, Sarah. Our second winner today is, excuse me, Omar A. Congratulations, Omar. Our third winner today is Richard B. Congratulations, Richard. And our fourth and final winner today is Martin C. Congratulations, Martin. We'll be following up with all four of you via email to get your gift card over to you. So please check your inbox. And if you don't see it there, please check your spam folder. Jeff and Helen, as always, you guys just hit it out of the park with your presentations. There's been such great information in today's webinar. So I really do appreciate, as always, you guys coming on and giving the discussion about value stream management. Good stuff all the way around.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Yes. I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. And this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody. And please, whatever you do, stay safe. And Helen, enjoy your time off.
I will. Thank you very much.